Washington State, 2 DEA agents disappeared while investigating cross-border trafficking, leaving behind a mystery that lasted for 8 long years. Then, during a routine exploration of a cave system, a mining crew made a startling discovery: a white Ford F-150 submerged in a flooded cavern with evidence that would change everything. This discovery brought the truth to light, one that shattered previous assumptions about the agent's disappearance. At exactly 8 a.m., Marcus Rivera was jolted awake by his phone's shrill ringtone. Groggy and disoriented, he fumbled around his nightstand in his Seattle apartment, knocking over a glass of water before managing to answer. The caller ID read, Director Patricia Thornton, DEA International Operations. She never called this early unless something major was going on. Rivera, he answered, his voice thick with sleep. Marcus, I need you to sit down, if you're not already. Director Thornton's voice had a serious tone, instantly pulling him out of his foggy state. We've had a development in Elena's case. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. It had been 8 years of unanswered questions, wondering if his sister was alive or dead, and the crushing guilt of not being there when she needed him. He gripped the phone, his hand tightening around it as she continued. Carl Hendris and his mining crew were conducting routine surveys near the Canadian border when they found a white Ford F-150 through a skylight opening in the cave ceiling. The VIN matches Elena's missing vehicle. The room felt like it was spinning. Marcus forced himself to breathe, to process what he was hearing. The truck? It's definitely hers? Field verification confirms it, Thornton confirmed. It appears the vehicle fell or was pushed through the opening, landing in a partially flooded cavern below. We're sending you the coordinates now. Local forensics are already on site. How long has it been down there? Any signs of... Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. That's one of the concerning aspects, Thornton said carefully. Despite being submerged for 8 years, the preliminary report shows minimal rust or water damage. The forensics team believes it may have been placed there more recently than the original disappearance date. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. If the truck had been moved recently, it meant someone had been covering their tracks all these years, someone who might still be out there. I'm heading there now, Marcus said, already pulling on his clothes, his voice steady despite the rising tension. Marcus, I know this is personal, but you need to maintain professional distance. We're treating this as a potential crime scene, not just a recovery operation. They both knew it wasn't just professional for him. Nothing about Elena's disappearance could ever be. As he drove north through the thick forests of Washington, the city of Seattle slowly giving way to towering evergreens and winding mountain roads, memories of the months after Elena and her partner Sarah Collins vanished flooded his mind. Every lead, every tip, every reported sighting. He had followed them all. They had been investigating suspected smuggling routes along the border, focusing on corridors used for moving drugs and people between British Columbia and Washington State. Their last check-in had been routine, just another surveillance operation. Part of a career full of them, the GPS led him to a gravel access road that hadn't existed 8 years ago, likely created by the mining company for their survey work. Orange cones and DEA vehicles marked the makeshift command center at the cave entrance, buzzing with activity. Forensics teams in white coveralls, local law enforcement securing the perimeter. This was no longer just a missing persons case. Dr. Sarah Lindstrom, the lead forensics investigator, greeted him with a mix of professionalism and sympathy. Agent Rivera, I was told to expect you, she said. I want to prepare you for what we've found. As they approached the tent where the bodies were being processed, Marcus's stomach turned. Inside, 3 body bags lay on examination tables, each tagged with preliminary identification numbers. We've recovered 3 bodies so far, Dr. Lindstrom explained. One has been confirmed as Agent Sarah Collins, using dental records and her DEA badge, which was still on her person. The words hit Marcus like a fist to the gut. Sarah had been Elena's partner for 3 years. She had a young daughter at home. Dr. Lindstrom showed him the digital x-rays. Agent Collins shows signs of blunt force trauma to the skull, injuries inconsistent with a fall or vehicle accident. This suggests deliberate strikes with a heavy object. This was no longer just a missing persons case. It was a homicide investigation. The other 2 bodies, both female, were significantly decomposed, and there were no matches in the missing persons databases yet. DNA testing was underway, and they were working with Canadian authorities to confirm identities. Dr. Lindstrom paused, watching Marcus's face carefully. Agent Rivera. Marcus felt the weight of Dr. Lindstrom's words as they landed on him. We've thoroughly searched the vehicle and the immediate cave area. Agent Elena Rivera's body is not among those we've recovered. The relief was brief, quickly overshadowed by a flood of renewed dread. If Elena wasn't in the cave with Sarah and the truck, where had she gone? Had she escaped, only to meet her end somewhere else, or, his heart skipped, had she been taken alive? Dr. Lindstrom led him to the truck, now partially submerged in the cave, illuminating it with powerful spotlights. The white F-150's DEA markings were still visible despite the murky water. The sight of it sent a jolt through Marcus, triggering memories of Elena proudly showing off her new truck, joking about finally having a vehicle capable of handling the rough terrain of Border Patrol. The minimal water damage is puzzling, Dr. Lindstrom continued. This cave floods seasonally, and if the truck had been here for 8 years, we'd expect more deterioration. Our preliminary assessment suggests it's been here for 6 months at most. Marcus scanned the recovery manifest, hoping he had missed something, that Elena's name would appear somewhere. But it remained absent. She was still a ghost, her disappearance leaving nothing behind but unanswered questions and a partner's lifeless body. We're expanding the search grid, Dr. Lindstrom reassured him. If there are other remains in connected cave systems, we'll find them. But Marcus knew from his years of searching that sometimes people didn't want to be found. Some secrets were worth killing to keep buried. He stared at the cave opening, wondering if Elena had looked up through that same skylight in her final moments, or if her story had gone on beyond this dark hole in the earth. One thing was certain: Sarah Collins' murder proved Elena and her partner hadn't gotten lost or had an accident. They had been targeted, and their killer had gone to great lengths to hide the evidence. Later, Marcus pulled into the Cascade Ridge Motel, its neon sign flickering weakly in the gray afternoon light. The place seemed like a relic of another era. He felt the weight of exhaustion, not just from the physical toll, but from the emotional burden of seeing Sarah's body, of confronting the brutal reality of what had happened to his sister's partner. Director Thornton had been firm on the phone. Take the mandatory rest period, Marcus. 4 hours minimum. That's not a request. Marcus knew she was right. Agents emotionally compromised made mistakes. But every moment away from the investigation felt like a betrayal to Elena's memory. The motel room reeked of industrial cleaner and old carpet, making it feel even more isolated. Marcus placed his service weapon on the nightstand with careful precision, followed by the stack of case files he'd grabbed. 8 years of reports, witness statements, and dead-end leads that he could recite from memory. His hands trembled as he unscrewed the cap from a water bottle. It wasn't the cool mountain air or lack of food, it was the crash of adrenaline mixed with grief. Seeing the truck in the cave, knowing Sarah had died violently, and that Elena was still missing, had shattered the fragile comfort he had clung to for years. Just as he hung his jacket over a chair by the window, a firm knock interrupted the silence. 3 measured raps, authoritative and official. Through the peephole, he saw a uniformed officer, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair visible beneath his campaign hat. Marcus opened the door, positioning his body to block the view of the weapon on the nightstand. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady. "Agent Rivera, I'm Sheriff Wade Thompson from Cascade County." The sheriff extended a large hand, his grip firm yet slightly damp. I apologize for the intrusion, but I have a time-sensitive matter regarding your sister's case. The sheriff's uniform was crisp, his badge polished, but there was something in his pale blue eyes, a nervousness that didn't match his authoritative bearing. "Come in, Sheriff," Marcus said, stepping aside. He noted how Thompson's gaze swept the room, lingering on the case files and his weapon. The sheriff removed his hat, revealing a receding hairline dark with perspiration, despite the cool October weather. "I'll get straight to the point," Thompson said, shifting his weight. His hand unconsciously moved toward his service weapon before dropping to his side. "I have a confidential informant who claims to have information about Agent Rivera. Elena, I mean." Marcus's pulse quickened. "What kind of information?" "That's the complication," Thompson replied. "This individual has had some negative experiences with federal agencies. They specifically requested to speak only with Elena's family member, not in any official DEA capacity. They're skittish, ready to run at the first sign of a formal investigation." "Where is this informant now?" "That's what I'm here about," Sheriff Thompson continued, his voice urgent. "They're willing to meet, but only at a location of their choosing, somewhere private, away from any potential surveillance." Thompson's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it quickly before continuing. "I know this is irregular, but given the potential value of the information..." Marcus studied him carefully. "What exactly did this informant tell you? Why come forward now, after 8 years?" "The discovery at the cave has people talking," Thompson said, his words coming faster now. "Old secrets have a way of surfacing when bodies start appearing." He paused, as if weighing his next words. "Look, I understand your skepticism, but I was part of the original search effort. I want answers as much as you do." "I appreciate that, Sheriff. Tell me, what evidence was recovered today?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, trying to keep control of the situation. "I was only there briefly," Thompson said, leaning forward, his interest sharpening. "That's what I was hoping you could tell me. My department's been kept out of the loop, federal jurisdiction and all." "Were all 3 bodies identified? Any personal effects recovered?" Marcus pressed. Thompson seemed to hesitate for a moment. 2 of the victims remain unidentified. Sarah Collins was confirmed through dental records and the vehicle. "The truck?" Marcus asked, suddenly more focused. "I heard something about it being surprisingly well preserved." Dr. Lindstrom's earlier warnings flashed through Marcus's mind. The sheriff's questions were too specific, too focused on the details of the evidence, not the victims. "They're still processing the scene," Marcus said, trying to mask his suspicion. "Why do you ask?" Thompson wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, his gaze shifting uneasily, just trying to understand the full picture. Then, his voice lowered. "And Elena? Was her body among those recovered?" The question hung in the air, and Marcus froze, his heart pounding. He shook his head slowly. "No, Elena wasn't in the cave." Thompson paused, visibly collecting himself, the tension in the room thickening. After a long beat, he muttered, "Well, that leaves hope she might have survived the initial incident. All the more reason to meet with my informant." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his suspicions growing. "Tell me, Sheriff, will the forensics team be expanding their search, bringing in additional resources like ground-penetrating radar?" Thompson's response came too quickly, too smoothly. Standard procedure would involve a systematic grid expansion, cadaver dogs, GPR units for the surrounding area. The DEA will probably request thermal imaging drones, check nearby water sources, examine game trails for evidence of remains being moved by animals. They'll want to search at least a 5-meter radius from the primary scene. Marcus nodded slowly, his instincts kicking in. Few county sheriffs could rattle off DEA evidence procedures with such precision. "You seem very familiar with federal investigation protocols." "I've worked with your agency before," Thompson replied, but his eyes darted away, avoiding direct contact. "Cross-border jurisdiction issues mostly. We need to coordinate resources to make sure we're not duplicating efforts. Marcus, already on edge, stood up, signaling the conversation was coming to an end. I'll need to clear any meeting with my supervisor first. Time is a factor here. Thompson's jaw tightened and he rose as well. My informant won't wait long. They're scared, Agent Rivera. Whatever they know, it's had them looking over their shoulder for 8 years. I'll give you 2 hours, Marcus said, his voice firm. I'll contact you through official channels. Thompson's face tightened, but he nodded. 2 hours after that, I can't guarantee they'll still be willing to talk. He moved toward the door, but paused before leaving. Agent Rivera, I know what it's like to lose someone. I had a sister too. Died in a car accident when she was 23. The not knowing. That would be even worse. The words sounded hollow, a performance that didn't reach his eyes. Marcus maintained a polite expression until the door closed behind him. Then, he moved swiftly to the window, watching Thompson sit in his patrol car for several minutes, making what appeared to be a heated phone call. After a while, Thompson finally drove away. Every instinct Marcus had honed in 15 years with the DEA screamed danger. Thompson's specific questions, his detailed knowledge, and the convenient appearance of an informant just hours after the bodies were discovered formed a pattern too suspicious to ignore. But if there was even a chance the sheriff had real information about Elena, Marcus couldn't dismiss it entirely. He picked up his phone to call Director Thornton, but hesitated. Official channels meant official responses, and Thompson would be notified immediately of any federal inquiry. If the sheriff was involved in some way, alerting him would only give him time to cover his tracks. Instead, Marcus retrieved his service weapon, checking the magazine before holstering it. Whatever Thompson's real agenda was, one thing was clear. The sheriff knew more about Elena's disappearance than any uninvolved local lawman should, and his barely concealed relief at learning Elena's body wasn't found in the cave suggested that knowledge was something worth protecting. By 2 p.m., Marcus was at the DEA field office on the 15th floor of a federal building in downtown Seattle. As he badged through security, the panoramic view of Elliott Bay was lost on him. His mind churned with the implications of Thompson's visit, replaying every micro-expression, every specific question, and every moment of barely concealed relief when he learned Elena's body hadn't been found. Marcus sat in the dimly lit archive room, the hum of the climate control systems a constant backdrop as he sifted through the old case files. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as he accessed the original missing persons report, the one he had filed himself 8 years ago when Elena had failed to check in after 48 hours. Reading his own words again brought back the panic, the uncertainty of those first days, the slow transformation from concern to desperation as hours turned into days, then weeks. But it was Sheriff Thompson's contributions to the investigation that drew his attention now. Thompson had filed his first report at 7:23 a.m., the morning after Elena and Sarah disappeared, remarkably detailed for someone who claimed to have been off duty the previous night. Marcus read through the sheriff's assessment with new eyes, his suspicions growing stronger with each paragraph. Based on my extensive knowledge of local terrain, Thompson had written, I recommend focusing search efforts on the following sectors. What followed was a carefully constructed search grid, one that now seemed to create a corridor of untouched territory along the Canadian border. Thompson had justified each exclusion with seemingly reasonable explanations. Some areas were too steep for vehicle access, others flooded seasonally, and some were fenced-off private property with security that would have reported any intrusion. Marcus pulled up satellite imagery from 8 years ago, comparing it to Thompson's recommendations. The so-called impassable terrain showed clear evidence of trails. The flooded sections were bone dry in the images from that October, and the supposed secured private property appeared to be abandoned structures with no visible fencing or security measures. He dug deeper into the supplemental files, finding a report that made his blood run cold. James Carver, a game warden with 30 years of experience in these woods, had filed a contradictory assessment just 2 days after Thompson's. Carver had noted well-established paths through sectors 7 and 9, exactly the areas Thompson had declared impassable. The warden had even mentioned recent vehicle tracks inconsistent with logging operations near the cave system. Yet somehow, Carver's report had been buried in supplemental files, never integrated into the main investigation. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard again, pulling up missing persons databases for Cascade County and surrounding jurisdictions. He set parameters for the past decade, focusing on Thompson's patrol areas. The results sent a chill down his spine: 17 missing persons cases along Thompson's regular patrol routes. The state average for similar rural areas was 4 to 5 over the same period. And the victims all shared a disturbing pattern. Mostly young women, many of them immigrants or traveling alone, people whose disappearances might not trigger immediate large-scale searches. Maria Gonzalez, 28, an undocumented immigrant last seen hitchhiking near the border. Ashley Chen, 19, a college student whose car broke down on Highway 20. Natasha Volkov, 24, a Russian tourist who vanished during a solo hiking trip. Case after case, all bearing Thompson's assessment signature: likely voluntary disappearance, probable border crossing to avoid immigration enforcement, no evidence of foul play. The sheriff had effectively shut down deeper investigations with his authoritative reports, and jurisdictional complexities meant federal agencies rarely second-guessed local law enforcement assessments. Marcus accessed the shared law enforcement database using his federal credentials to pull Thompson's duty logs from October 8 years ago. The official record showed routine patrols, nothing out of the ordinary. But when Marcus cross-referenced with fuel receipts from the county motor pool, a glaring discrepancy emerged. Thompson's logged patrols should have consumed approximately 80 gallons of fuel. The receipt, however, showed he'd burned through enough gas for 240 miles, triple the expected distance. Where had Thompson driven that night? The answer came from an unexpected source buried in the supplemental files of the original investigation. Raw cell tower data had been collected, but apparently never analyzed during the chaotic multi-agency search. No one had thought to check where Thompson's phone had been pinging. Marcus ran the data through mapping software, watching as Thompson's movements painted a damning picture. At 11:47 p.m., approximately 2 hours after Elena's last check-in, Thompson's phone pinged a tower near the cave system, the same cave where the truck had just been found. He remained in that area for over an hour, his phone connecting to towers in a pattern consistent with someone moving around the location, not just driving through. Then, at 2:15 a.m., the signals showed him heading north toward the Canadian border before eventually returning to town. The sheriff had been at the crime scene the night Elena and Sarah disappeared. He had spent considerable time there, hours before any missing persons report was filed, before anyone except the killer should have known something was wrong. Marcus felt the weight of the evidence settle on his shoulders. A corrupt sheriff strategically positioned to facilitate smuggling operations. A sheriff systematically covering up disappearances, quite possibly involved in the murder of 2 federal agents. But knowing the truth and proving it were 2 different things, especially when accusing a fellow law enforcement officer. Marcus understood, with crystal clarity, why he couldn't report this through official channels. The law enforcement community was tightly interconnected. Any inquiry into Thompson would trigger immediate alerts through the system. The sheriff would know within minutes that he was under investigation. Evidence would disappear. Witnesses would vanish or recant. Any chance of finding out what really happened to Elena would evaporate. Marcus began methodically copying files to an encrypted external drive, financial records showing Thompson living well beyond a county sheriff's salary, property records indicating he owned 3 rental houses and a boat, all purchased with cash over the past 6 years, travel records showing frequent trips to Vancouver and Seattle, always without official explanation. The truth was close, but it was buried deeper than he'd ever imagined. Marcus's mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The man he had once trusted, the sheriff who had always been so meticulously diligent in his duties, was now revealed as a key player in an underground network built on human suffering and smuggling. Thompson's connections to these men were clearer than ever before. Victor Koff, a known drug runner, Chen Wei, involved in human trafficking, and Bobby Tanner, a local who had always skirted just outside the law. These were the men who had evaded capture time and time again, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement, always knowing when and where to avoid patrols. Now, Marcus realized, the sheriff had been part of that network all along. He adjusted his grip on the binoculars, focusing on Thompson as he walked toward the group of men. The casualness of the scene, the backslaps, the handshakes, betrayed a deeper familiarity, one that only those deeply embedded in this world could have. This was not just business, this was personal. Thompson wasn't merely facilitating smuggling operations, he was part of it, a trusted ally in the very network that had taken Elena and Sarah's lives. As the sheriff exchanged pleasantries with Koff, Wei, and Tanner, Marcus's thoughts flitted between the task at hand and the growing realization that the man he was shadowing was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He had been covering his tracks for years, manipulating investigations, and even going as far as orchestrating the disappearances of young women, probably to maintain his operations in the shadows. The possibility that he had orchestrated the murder of 2 federal agents to protect his empire was no longer a far-off theory. It was now a chilling reality. Marcus knew that if Thompson had really been behind the deaths of Elena and Sarah, this encounter was only the tip of the iceberg. He needed to gather more evidence, confirm the sheriff's involvement, and most importantly, find out where Elena was, if she was still alive, if there was any chance of recovering her from whatever hellhole she was being held in. He pulled back slightly from his vantage point behind the fallen cedar, trying to keep his breathing steady, keeping his body still in the underbrush. As he scanned the area, a sense of urgency crept into his thoughts. If Thompson had been this careful with his tracks over the years, he wouldn't let a single agent, especially one like Marcus, get too close. The sheriff knew how to cover his tracks, but Marcus was betting that with the right information, he could finally turn the tables. He looked back through the binoculars again. Thompson was now gesturing toward one of the trucks, clearly involved in some kind of conversation with Koff and Wei, while Tanner lingered nearby, watching the surroundings. The whole setup seemed off, too clean, too coordinated for a casual meeting. This wasn't just a conversation between old acquaintances. It was a transaction, one that had far-reaching consequences for Marcus, Elena, and anyone else caught in Thompson's web. Marcus's hand hovered over his phone. He needed to make contact with the outside world, but not yet, not without more proof. He couldn't risk tipping off Thompson, not now, not when he was this close. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain calm. Every second here was critical. He had to keep his focus sharp, his wits about him. The clearing around the old mill was quiet for now, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Thompson and his men were too absorbed in their meeting to notice Marcus. But that wouldn't last forever. Marcus knew he had to act soon. Every piece of this operation hinged on the information he could gather, on the chance to disrupt a criminal network that had been thriving under the very noses of law enforcement. He stayed hidden for what felt like an eternity, watching as the sheriff and his cohorts discussed something that Marcus couldn't quite hear from his distance. His mind raced. Had they been tipped off about his surveillance? Did they already know he was onto them? He couldn't afford to make a mistake now. As the men finally broke apart and began walking toward the vehicles, Marcus pulled back, retreating into the cover of the forest with a steady, practiced motion. Every move counted now. He had to find Elena. He had to expose Thompson. With one last look at the abandoned mill, Marcus made his way back through the trees, already planning his next move. The sheriff might think he had all the answers, But Marcus was determined to turn the tables. He would find the truth, no matter the cost. "David, I need backup at my location. Full tactical team, highest priority," Marcus said, his voice tight with urgency. His mind was still racing, processing the horrific conversations he had overheard, the growing realization that the sheriff was not just involved in a smuggling operation, but had orchestrated murder to cover it up. "What's your situation?" David asked, his tone instantly sharpening. "I've found the conspiracy," Marcus replied, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Thompson's been running a drug and human trafficking operation for years. He's been involved in murders, including Elena's partner Sarah Collins, and possibly Elena herself. I've got photographic evidence, names, locations. They know I'm onto them, and they're moving fast. Clearance operations for the northern warehouse tonight. They've planned to evacuate everything, product, people, records. I believe Elena might be there, alive or dead, but we're running out of time." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus could hear David shuffling papers, a faint tapping sound as he processed the information. "Marcus, where are you now?" David asked, his voice hardening. "About 10 minutes out of town," Marcus answered, his mind mapping the route. "I'm heading to the northern warehouse right now. The sheriff and his partners are expecting me at 5 p.m. for a meet, but it's a trap. They want to eliminate me before I dig any deeper." "Understood. We're mobilizing a team now. You're too exposed out there. We'll be in your area within the hour. Get to a safe location. Don't engage unless you're certain you've got a clear shot at something useful." "Negative," Marcus said firmly. "I can't wait. They'll be gone before backup arrives. I need to hit the northern warehouse now, or I'll lose everything. Especially Elena." David's voice softened for a moment. "You know we can't just send you in like this, right? No backup, no intel, no way to guarantee your safety. You're asking for a fight you can't win alone." "I've got no choice," Marcus said, his mind already focused on the road ahead. The warehouse, the people, the answers. It was all within reach now. The sheriff and his men have been playing this game for too long. If I wait, they'll erase everything. I can't risk that. I need to go now. "All right," David replied, the edge in his voice sharpening again. "Get to the warehouse. Keep us updated. We'll try to keep you covered as best we can." Marcus hung up the phone and sped toward the warehouse. His hands trembled from the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he pushed the fear down. He had to keep it together. He had no idea what he'd find at the northern warehouse, but it was the only lead he had left. The clock was ticking, and every second was a step closer to a confrontation that could either reveal the truth about Elena or get him killed in the process. The road became more isolated as he neared the outskirts of town. The woods thickened, and the shadows lengthened as dusk approached. The northern warehouse wasn't far now. He had memorized the route from the maps, but his gut twisted with every mile. The entire area was a perfect spot for an ambush. Remote, no cell coverage, and only one access road in and out. As he turned off the main road onto a narrow, unmarked dirt path, he could feel the weight of the situation settling in. His plan was simple: get in, find Elena, gather evidence, and get out before anyone realized he was there. But as he neared the site, the reality of what he was about to face hit him. Thompson and his men were not amateurs. They were ruthless, and Marcus knew they would stop at nothing to protect their operation. He had no idea what he would find at the warehouse, but he had to push forward. For Elena, for Sarah, for justice. Marcus moved silently through the dense underbrush, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on him. Every step he took felt like it could be his last, but he had no choice. Thompson had a head start, and the sheriff was getting desperate, his recklessness a sign of how far he was willing to go to protect his operation. The cold evening air mixed with the smell of pine and earth as Marcus crouched low. His tactical flashlight dimmed, conserving its power as he edged closer to the clearing where he knew Thompson had stopped. The patrol car's brake lights flared ahead, briefly illuminating the landscape before fading into the shadows. Marcus knew he was close, too close for comfort. Thompson had pulled off the road, likely preparing for a final escape route into the wilderness. His phone had lost signal, leaving him with only his instincts to guide him. With no backup, no immediate contact, and no chance of reaching Chen, he was operating on sheer will. The northern warehouse was still on his mind, but now, with Thompson heading toward the same areas he had blocked off years ago, Marcus's priorities had shifted. Elena's name, still fresh on his mind, pulled him forward. If Thompson knew where Elena was or had hidden her, it was now or never. He pulled himself up, using a fallen log as cover, watching Thompson's car. The sheriff hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on whatever task lay ahead. Marcus could hear Thompson moving around, rummaging in the car. The sound of heavy items shifting inside the vehicle made his pulse quicken. Weapons, cash, documents. He had to be getting closer to the truth. Thompson was hiding something big. Carefully, Marcus checked the magazine in his weapon again, making sure it was fully loaded. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. He couldn't let Thompson slip away now. This was his only chance. The wind shifted slightly, rustling the leaves above him. Marcus held his breath, freezing in place, listening intently. He could hear the distant sound of Thompson's footsteps crunching through the gravel, getting closer to where Marcus was positioned. The sheriff had taken to the trees now, his next steps careful but quick. He knew something was coming, and he was preparing to cover his tracks. Marcus didn't hesitate. He moved again, silently but swiftly, closing the distance. Thompson was still unaware of his presence. Marcus had the element of surprise, but he knew it wouldn't last. Through the gaps in the trees, he saw Thompson's silhouette, his back to Marcus as he approached a small shack tucked away in the corner of the clearing. It was old, weather-beaten, and the kind of place that screamed secret hideout. There was no mistake now. Thompson was leading him right to whatever had been hidden for so long. With slow, deliberate movements, Marcus crept closer, keeping his body low and his breathing steady. He could hear the faint sound of Thompson's muttered curses as he struggled with something near the shack. Marcus's mind raced, trying to predict the next move. Was he preparing to make a phone call? Was he about to meet someone? Then a thought hit Marcus like a bolt of lightning. If Thompson was preparing to cover up whatever evidence remained, there was only one place he would go, the northern warehouse. It had to be there. Marcus's hand tightened around the flashlight, ready to signal the team, but he had to be sure. If he moved too soon, everything could fall apart. He needed to be certain that Thompson was heading in the right direction. His pulse quickened as he waited, crouching in the darkness, watching the sheriff's every move. Through the trees, he saw Thompson pause, his head snapping toward the woods. He knew. Thompson had somehow sensed the presence of someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Marcus's heart skipped. He had no more time to wait. He moved forward. Thompson, realizing he wasn't alone, spun around and began to run. His retreat, once calm and calculated, was now full of panic. He bolted, crashing through the underbrush, his footsteps heavy and rapid. Marcus took a deep breath, sprinting after him. The hunt was on. He couldn't let Thompson disappear into the night. The truth about Elena was within reach, and he wasn't about to let anything stand in his way. Through the dense forest, the two men raced, one desperate to cover his tracks, the other determined to uncover the secrets hidden in the wilderness. The trees parted as Marcus slowly crept into the clearing, each step silent, his tactical training taking over. His eyes locked onto Thompson, who was frantically digging with a shovel. The scene was eerily quiet, save for the sound of dirt being thrown aside and the occasional muttered words from the sheriff, broken with panic. Should have moved her years ago. Knew this would happen. Can't let them find this site. Evidence still here. Stupid to keep it so close. Thompson's voice trailed off in desperation. Marcus's heart clenched as the realization hit him. Thompson was digging up Elena's grave. His hands instinctively reached for his weapon, his body reacting on autopilot as he stepped into the clearing. "Drop the shovel, Thompson. Hands where I can see them." Marcus's voice was sharp, commanding, but beneath it, he could feel the weight of the moment, the tremor of rage building inside him. Thompson spun around, his hand darting toward his holstered weapon, but Marcus had already anticipated the move. His own weapon was trained on the sheriff's center mass, unwavering. "Don't," Marcus warned, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "It's over, Wade. Drop the shovel and step away from the grave." For a moment, Thompson froze, his face slick with sweat, eyes wide with a mix of fear and something else, something broken. Then, to Marcus's shock, the sheriff let out a hollow laugh, the sound devoid of humor. "The grave? You think this is her grave?" Thompson scoffed, shaking his head. "Jesus, Rivera, you really don't understand what your sister stumbled into." "Then explain it to me." Marcus's voice cracked as he spoke, his weapon still aimed, but his heart beating faster as he prepared to hear what he had suspected for years. "Tell me what happened to Elena." Thompson hesitated, dropping the shovel but keeping his hand near his weapon. He looked down at the hole, the dirt falling away around him, as if gathering his thoughts. "She was supposed to be routine surveillance," Thompson said, his voice shifting to a cold, detached tone. "Just another federal agent checking smuggling routes, filing reports no one would read. But Elena, she was too good at her job, too persistent." Marcus kept the weapon trained on him, refusing to give any ground, his heart hammering with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Keep talking." Thompson wiped his face with his forearm, his breath ragged as he continued. "She found the transfer point by accident. We were moving a shipment, drugs and girls, the usual run. Sarah Collins tried to call it in immediately. Went for her radio. Klov shot her before she could say a word. Clean shot to the head. She died instantly." "And Elena?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with a growing dread. "Elena was smarter," Thompson muttered, his voice taking on a bitter tone. "She tried to retreat, tried to get back to their vehicle, but we couldn't let her go. Not after what she'd seen. The operation was too valuable. Millions in drugs, dozens of girls move through our corridor every year. The bosses wanted her alive. They needed to know what the DEA knew, who else was investigating, how much time we had before more agents came." Marcus's grip on his weapon tightened, the weight of Thompson's words sinking in. "You tortured her for 2 months." Thompson's expression didn't falter as he spoke. "Kept her in a shipping container we'd converted into cells for difficult merchandise the bosses brought in. Brought in a specialist, someone who knew how to break people without killing them. But your sister..." He shook his head with what could only be described as reluctant admiration. "Elena was tougher than anyone expected." "Tell me everything," Marcus demanded, his voice breaking through the storm of emotions. "She deserves to have her story told." Thompson glanced back at the hole in the ground, then met Marcus's gaze. "She escaped twice. The first time she made it almost a mile through the forest before the dogs caught her, left scratches on trees, tried to create a trail. We had to move the entire operation after that. Couldn't risk her markers being found." Thompson's hand edged toward his weapon again as he continued, but Marcus was too focused to let it distract him. The second time, she actually managed to hide evidence. Photos, documents she'd stolen, a bloody piece of her shirt with a note. Buried it all in a cache she marked. That's what I'm digging up, not her body, but her final "you to us," her evidence. If the feds expand their search grid, they'll find it eventually. "Where is she?" Marcus's voice was pleading now, his vision blurring with unshed tears, but he couldn't afford to show any weakness. Not now. "Where's Elena's body?" Thompson's desperation morphed into a cruel sneer as he replied, "You want to know how she died?" He paused, as if savoring the moment. "When she finally broke, after weeks of interrogation, You know what information she gave us? Badge numbers from 5 years ago, outdated radio frequencies, patrol schedules that had changed 3 times since her capture. She played us, fed us worthless intel to buy time, hoping someone would find her. Marcus's heart pounded as Thompson's words hit him like a fist. His sister had given everything, held on just long enough to protect the others, to give them a fighting chance. Thompson wiped his forehead, his voice flat and uncaring, as he continued. We realized she'd never give us anything useful. The specialist wanted to sell her, said she'd bring good money in certain markets, a federal agent as a trophy, but she'd seen too many faces, knew too much, so I handled it myself. Thompson's eyes narrowed, his face twisted in something like satisfaction as he finished. 1 shot, back of the head, same as her partner. She died brave, if that matters. Never begged, never stopped fighting. Marcus felt his heart rip open, the anger and grief nearly overwhelming him. His sister had been strong to the end. She had fought. She had never given up. He took a step forward, the tears he'd been holding back threatening to spill, but he refused to let them. Where's her body, Thompson? Tell me. Thompson's smile was cold, calculating. Where do you think? We had a crematorium for problems like her. No body, no evidence, no closure for families who ask too many questions. Your sister is dead, Rivera, has been for 8 years. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus's grip on his weapon remained steady, but everything inside him was burning with rage. Elena had fought, and now he was the only one left to make sure her story was heard. Thompson had just sealed his fate, and Marcus was going to make sure of it. Marcus's mind struggled to process the chaos surrounding him, but his instincts kicked in, forcing him to stay alert even as the world around him spun. His temple throbbed with the pounding of his heartbeat, a constant reminder of the brutal rifle strike that had knocked him out. The cool metal of the van's floor was all that kept him grounded, but he had to focus, had to make sure he remembered every detail. The van's tires rolled over uneven terrain, the jolts sending waves of pain through his skull, but he fought to stay conscious, cataloging everything he could see. Through blurred vision, Marcus watched the 2 men who had ambushed him in the forest, speaking in a mixture of English and Russian. They didn't look his way, too busy with their conversation about logistics. One of them occasionally gestured to a map, marking something with a pen. His eyes flicked between their words and the outside world, doing everything he could to memorize his surroundings, the path they were taking, the landmarks that might guide someone to him if they could trace his movements. The engine's low rumble was almost soothing, but the smell of sweat and oil filled the small space, reminding him of the danger he was in. The van took a sharp left, and through the windshield, Marcus saw a rusted water tower in the distance, its faded letters reading Cascade Lumber Company. Another turn, and there it was, a wooden bridge creaking under the weight of the van. The bridge had seen better days, but it was just another landmark Marcus mentally noted down. Then came more observations, a burned-out gas station, a distinctive rock formation, a distant cell tower standing tall on a ridge. Small details, but they were vital. After about 20 minutes, the van slowed as it neared a massive, rusting warehouse complex that seemed to rise out of the forest like an unwanted tumor. The old lumber processing plant, now repurposed for something far darker, was surrounded by fresh tire tracks in the dirt. The warehouse was covered in security cameras, each corner and approach surveilled. The windows were blacked out, and Marcus noticed air conditioning units bolted to the side, unusual for an abandoned building, but necessary for what was being stored inside. As the van doors opened, the stench hit Marcus like a wave. Human waste, fear, sweat, and something chemical beneath it all. He was yanked out of the vehicle, his legs unsteady from the head injury, and dragged into the warehouse. His eyes struggled to adjust to the harsh industrial lighting, and what he saw nearly broke him. The warehouse was divided into makeshift cells by chain-link fences, each cage holding multiple victims, mostly young women and girls, some barely more than children. They huddled together on thin mattresses, their bodies showing signs of abuse, bruises, torn clothing, and eyes hollow from a life of suffering. The air was thick with their fear, the conditioned quiet of people who had learned that resisting would only make things worse. "Madre de Dios," one of the girls whispered, pressing herself against the fencing as Marcus was dragged past her. Others shrank back, too afraid to make a sound, their eyes flicking nervously toward him as he was pulled through the room. This wasn't just trafficking. This was exploitation on a scale Marcus could barely fathom. These people weren't just being sold. They were part of a ruthless criminal operation, a network of misery that spanned far wider than he had imagined. Along the far wall, he saw the products that were fueling the operation. At least 50 kilos of what looked like heroin, all vacuum-sealed and stacked neatly. There were also boxes marked with pharmaceutical symbols that likely contained fentanyl, and in the corner of the warehouse, a sophisticated drug packaging station, complete with industrial presses and scales. It was clear now that this was no small-time operation. This was a full-scale criminal empire where human beings were as disposable as the drugs they smuggled. Thompson was already there, talking heatedly with a man Marcus recognized, Victor Koff, a Russian smuggler known for slipping through law enforcement's grasp. The conversation was loud enough for Marcus to hear snippets. Koff's accent was thick as he gestured angrily at Thompson. "This is insane, Thompson. You bring a federal agent here?" Thompson shot back, his voice sharp. "We had no choice. He was at the burial site. He knows about Elena Rivera, about the whole operation." The cold realization hit Marcus like a fist. Thompson had known all along. This was the truth he had been digging for, the reason Thompson had made sure to eliminate anyone who got too close. Elena wasn't just a casualty in a bigger operation. She was a threat to everything these people had built. Koff's response was immediate. "Then we kill him now, dump his body across the border, let the Canadians deal with it." But then a new voice interrupted the conversation. Marcus's heart skipped as he heard Chen's name. Chen emerged from a back office area, his expression calculating. "First, we find out what he knows, who he's told. If the DEA team is coming, we need to know how much time we have." Marcus was shoved into a reinforced storage room, a small closet with a heavy door that clanged shut behind him. They had stripped him of everything, his phone, his weapon, his badge, his wallet, all tossed carelessly onto a desk outside the room. His hands were zip-tied behind his back, leaving him trapped in the darkness, his thoughts racing. They were about to kill him. But Marcus wasn't out of options yet. Even if he didn't make it out of here alive, he knew he had to survive long enough to share what he had learned. His mind raced with the images of the victims, the evidence of the operation, and the knowledge that Elena's body was somewhere within these walls, hidden by people who had long since abandoned their humanity. He had to stay alive. He had to make sure the world knew what happened here. The rest, justice, closure, would come later, if he could survive long enough to make sure this nightmare ended for good. The sharp sting of pain in Marcus's arm sent waves of agony through him, but his mind stayed focused, laser sharp, as his body remained poised between the young girl and the chaos unfolding around them. The world around him had erupted into gunfire and shouts, but Marcus's instincts had one priority: protect the innocents. He wasn't going to let anyone else suffer because of the monsters he was fighting. The weight of the AK-47, which had become his temporary lifeline, felt heavier with each breath, but Marcus knew he couldn't stop. Not yet. The traffickers were beginning to surrender, but he still saw them, eyes full of rage and desperation, the ones who refused to lay down their weapons. The fight wasn't over. He couldn't afford to relax his guard just because backup had arrived. With every passing second, the pain in his arm worsened, but Marcus pushed it aside, focusing instead on the scene around him. Chen's team was pushing forward, securing the warehouse, sweeping it clear of hostile forces, but his mind never wavered from the cages where the victims huddled. His heart was heavy with the knowledge of how many had been subjected to this nightmare, how many had suffered for far too long before help arrived. The sound of the firefight slowly began to diminish, but Marcus couldn't stop himself from checking each cage, looking into each terrified face. There were young girls, barely more than children, pressed against the chain link, eyes wide with fear. He saw one who couldn't have been more than 14, her face streaked with tears. "Por favor, Audenos," the girl whispered, pressing herself tighter into the fence. "Stay down," Marcus ordered in Spanish, his voice hoarse with urgency. "Help is coming. Everyone, get low, away from the walls." He didn't wait for a response, didn't allow himself to see their fear. He had a job to do, and he wouldn't rest until every victim was free. He kept low, moving quickly and methodically through the maze of cages, taking cover as bullets flew past him. Behind him, the tactical team moved with practiced precision, clearing the building, pushing the remaining traffickers into a corner. Thompson's voice rang out across the chaos, distorted by the gunfire but unmistakable. "Rivera, you just signed their death warrants. We'll kill every witness before your backup arrives." Marcus barely registered Thompson's words, his focus already locked on Clav, who was making his way toward the cages. Clav's rifle was aimed directly at the victims, ready to execute anyone still alive. Without hesitation, Marcus broke cover and fired a burst of controlled shots. The first round caught Clav in the shoulder, spinning him around. The response was immediate. More gunfire erupted, forcing Marcus behind a concrete pillar. He gritted his teeth, enduring the sting of cement chips that peppered his face. The main door of the warehouse exploded inward with a deafening crash, and the DEA team flooded in, weapons drawn, sweeping the area with expert precision. The traffickers, caught between Marcus and the reinforcements, made a choice. Some surrendered immediately, dropping their weapons, while others, too stubborn, too committed to their cruel empire, chose to fight. The air filled with the deafening roar of automatic fire, the staccato of gunshots ringing in his ears. Marcus stayed low, determined to protect the victims as much as he could, scanning for any threats. Chen was attempting to flank the tactical team, and Marcus, knowing it would buy the team time, fired another shot, forcing the Russian to retreat. But just as he did, the world blurred. Sharp pain shot through his left arm, and he spun, feeling the world around him go out of focus. The burn of the bullet was instantaneous, a searing pain that sent him to the ground. He could hear the sound of his own breath, the familiar weight of the world pressing down on him, but he couldn't let it stop him. He saw the trafficker raising his weapon, aiming for the cages, aiming for a young girl. Without thinking, Marcus threw himself forward, using his body as a shield. The weapon fired, and he felt the impact in his vest. The force bruised his ribs, but didn't penetrate. He had shielded her. He had stopped the bullet. His vision swam as he collapsed next to her, the world spinning around him, but he stayed pressed against her, his hand gripping the gun he'd stolen, making sure no one came near. The shouts from the tactical team were distant, their calls growing more frantic. "Clear! Suspect down! Medic!" The voice above him was familiar, and it was Chen. He was kneeling beside him, his expression a mix of concern and anger. "Marcus, you're hit!" But Marcus, despite the pain, managed to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Check the victims first." Chen's gaze hardened, but he didn't argue. He stood, moving quickly to clear the remaining threats, while Marcus stayed crouched in the same position, trying to catch his breath. The chaos was fading, but Marcus didn't let go of his focus. He'd done what he had to do. He'd kept Elena's memory alive, saved what could be saved, and made sure the victims had a chance at survival. And as the sound of reinforcements drew nearer, Marcus finally allowed himself to close his eyes, knowing his job wasn't finished, but at least this part was over. Marcus knelt in the damp earth beside the exposed remains of his sister, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. Elena, his sister, the woman who had fought so fiercely, who had never stopped trying to do what was right, lay before him. After 8 long years of searching, of unrelenting pain and unanswered questions, the truth had finally come to light. But it wasn't the closure he had imagined. It wasn't the reunion, the chance to tell her how much he loved her, how proud he was of her. The soft hum of the forensics team's equipment, the gentle scraping of shovels as they uncovered more of Elena's remains, filled the air around him. The evidence of her final moments was being carefully revealed, layer by layer. The tactical vest with the DEA letters still visible despite the years of decay, the markings that had once been a symbol of her dedication to the law, it was all there, buried in the ground, waiting to be found. Elena's body had not been cremated, as Thompson had claimed. The lie he had told, the cruelty in every word, was shattered by the careful excavation of the soil. Marcus could almost feel her presence, her spirit there with him in that moment, even though she had been taken too soon, too violently, from this world. "Elena," he whispered through the tears, his voice breaking. He reached out with his good hand, but he didn't touch her. He couldn't. The pain was too much. He had failed her for so long. He hadn't been able to protect her, hadn't been able to stop the horrors that had happened to her. All he could do now was apologize, to beg for her forgiveness in a world where he had failed her as a brother. "I'm sorry it took so long," he whispered again, the words barely audible through the tears that spilled freely down his face. "I'm so sorry." Chen, standing quietly beside him, understood without needing words. His presence, the steady support, was all Marcus needed. He was grateful for the silence, for the unspoken solidarity between them as the forensics team continued their careful work. This was Elena's moment, her truth being revealed at last. As the team gently unearthed more of her remains, Marcus couldn't help but remember her, her smile, her strength, her unwavering commitment to justice. She had never been afraid to stand up for what was right, even if it meant putting herself in harm's way. She had been a fighter until the very end, and that was the part of her Marcus would hold on to forever. The remains were finally fully revealed, and the grief that had been building inside him erupted. He couldn't control it anymore. The pain, the regret, the years of searching and wondering had all led to this moment, a moment of finality, of closure, but also of loss so deep he felt as if he were drowning. The team worked around him, offering space, but Marcus could barely hear them. He could barely hear anything other than his own voice in his head, telling him he should have done more. The guilt consumed him, threatening to overwhelm him completely. But somewhere deep down, he knew this wasn't his fault. His sister had fought. She had tried, just like he had, to bring justice to those who deserved it. Her death had been a result of the cruelty of men like Thompson, men who would go to any lengths to protect their empire of suffering. As the last of the dirt was carefully moved aside, Marcus finally allowed himself to look at what was left of his sister, what she had become after everything she had been through. He would never forget her, never stop fighting for the truth she had so desperately sought to expose. Elena had given her life, but her story was far from over. He would make sure of that. Standing up, wiping the tears from his eyes, Marcus took a deep breath. The journey was far from finished, but he had finally found her. He had finally brought her home. "Doctor." Lindstrom crouched beside Marcus, her professional demeanor softened by the weight of the moment. Her words were clinical, but laced with empathy as she examined the skeletal evidence. Prolonged captivity, healed fractures consistent with torture, defensive wounds on the hands. She paused, indicating something on the ribs. "But Marcus, look here. Marks on the ribs, a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. It would have been instantaneous, a small mercy in an ocean of cruelty." Marcus's heart clenched at the thought of what his sister had endured. Months of torture, her bravery, and her final moments. But in this moment, he could almost feel a small sense of relief that she hadn't suffered alone for long. At least she hadn't died screaming in pain. Then the harsh reality of the situation hit him again as Chen's phone buzzed. "Thompson's talking. He wants to make a deal," Chen said, his voice tight. "No deals," Marcus said, his voice harsh, almost desperate. "He's offering locations of other burial sites, names of corrupted officials, the full network. The prosecutor will make that call, not us." Chen paused, then continued. "Marcus, he's also explaining about Elena, about what she hid." The excavation continued as Marcus absorbed this new information. Beneath Elena's remains, they found what Thompson had been so desperate to recover: a plastic-wrapped bundle preserved against the elements, containing photographs of the trafficking operation, documents stolen from Thompson's office, and a blood-stained piece of fabric. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as he unwrapped the fabric, revealing the writing. His sister's handwriting, scribbled on the piece of cloth. Elena Rivera, DEA, Special Agent, badge number 3847, taken alive. October 15th, Sarah Collins murdered at scene. Sheriff Wade Thompson involved trafficking operation warehouse 3 miles north of Brackenridge Mill. They're moving people and drugs. Please tell Marcus I fought. Tell him I never gave them anything real. Tell him I'm sorry." The words tore through Marcus, breaking something deep inside him. Elena had endured unimaginable suffering, and yet, in her final moments, she had apologized for doing everything she could to stop these monsters. She never gave up, even when it seemed hopeless. "She saved them," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at the note again, then over at the victims being led to safety. 32 people are alive tonight because she never gave up." The sound of the medic's work on his arm was distant, as Marcus's mind swirled with the truth, the undeniable facts that had just come to light. Thompson, the man who had been hiding behind a badge of authority, had been complicit in something far darker than Marcus had imagined. His confession came over the next few hours, delivered from his hospital bed in exchange for a desperate attempt to avoid the death penalty. The trafficking ring had been operating for over a decade, moving drugs south and people north, using law enforcement intelligence to avoid detection. Thompson's story was one of corruption from the start. "I was recruited early," he admitted, his voice hollow with regret. "Gambling debts made me vulnerable." Thompson admitted to everything: how Elena had found the transfer point by accident, how Sarah had died instantly with a clean shot to the head, how Elena, ever the professional, had tried to retreat to safety, but they couldn't let her go. Not after what she'd seen, not after she'd discovered their operation. The confession didn't change the truth, though. Elena had fought to the end. She had resisted, and she had planned. She'd stolen evidence, hidden it in a cache, buried it beneath the earth, knowing it would surface someday. The world would know the truth because of her, even if she didn't survive to see it. As the sun began to rise over the forest, Marcus stood vigil over the spot where his sister had been buried for 8 years. A medic worked on his arm, checking his vitals, concerned about shock, but Marcus barely registered the concern. This moment, this vigil, was his. He whispered to Elena, quietly updating her on the lives she had saved, on the truth that had finally come to light. "I'm sorry it took so long," he whispered, his voice breaking with raw emotion. "But I promise you, it mattered. You mattered." Chen approached quietly, his voice gentle. "We're mobilizing the team to return to the burial site. Dr. Lindstrom is already en route with ground-penetrating radar." Marcus's chest tightened. Thompson said she wasn't there. Said they cremated her? It's all I've had for 8 years. The words came out like ash in his mouth. "Thompson says a lot of things," Chen said softly, but with a tone that was reassuring even in the face of the brutality of the truth. But he was digging for something. Let's find out what. The medic stood between them, eyes darting between the two men, her patience wearing thin. "You should be in a hospital," she said, her voice firm. "You've lost blood, possible concussion from the head trauma." Marcus shook his head. not yet ready to accept that. Not yet. They continued their careful excavation, and as they dug deeper, the final truth emerged. Elena's remains were revealed to the night air, carefully removed from the earth that had buried her for so long. Marcus fell to his knees beside her grave, clutching the note she had written to him, his sister's final words. Tears flowed freely as he looked at the remains of the woman who had given everything for the truth, for the justice that so many had denied her. "I'm sorry it took so long," he whispered, reaching out with his good hand, but not quite touching her. The finality of it all was overwhelming, but Marcus felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had done what he could. He had found her. He had honored her fight. And though the fight was over for her, it wasn't over for him. Thompson would die in prison. The trafficking network was shattered. Lives had been saved. It wasn't justice. Nothing could be after what Elena endured, but it was resolution. Truth had finally come to light, and that was all Marcus could do with the time he had been given, the time his sister never had.